How is it that Genghis Khan was able to not only conquer China, considered one of the greatest civilizations in the world, but also Baghdad, another great civilization? So today we are going to discuss civilization versus the steppes. Okay? Civilization versus the steppes. The steppes are the grasslands, and people often refer to them as barbarians, okay? So in China, we refer to these people as like Yamanian barbarians. And in school, you're taught that there are major differences between civilization and barbarians, right? So the first major difference is that in civilization, you are allowed intellectual freedom. Because only by reading books, only by going to school, only by learning how to think can you be free to think, okay? And in the steppes, we think of them as emotional slaves. They are unpredictable, they are violent, okay? Second thing is that we think of civilization as open and curious. We love knowledge, we seek to gain more knowledge. Therefore, we are innovative, okay? Whereas the steppes people, they are static, okay? Because they are insular. They're close-minded, okay? And the last thing is that we think civilization leads to wealth and prosperity. Only if you're civilized can you truly be happy, okay? And wealthy. And we think that the steppes people are poor and therefore unhappy. And that is the general understanding of the difference between civilization and the barbarians, okay? The problem is that this creates a misunderstanding. And we can't really explain why is it that throughout human history, the steppes people have been the greatest conquerors. Okay, so the classic example is Genghis Khan. How is it that Genghis Khan was able to not only conquer China, okay, which is considered one of the greatest civilizations in the world, but also Baghdad, another great civilization. Okay? But what's interesting is that throughout human history, this has been a consistent pattern where the barbarians conquered the civilized people. Okay? So this is a problem. How is it that if in civilization, they're so free, they're so smart, they're so open, they're so curious, innovative, and so prosperous, why is it that they keep on losing out the steppes people? And the answer is because your traditional understanding is completely wrong, okay? And I will show you that it's actually the opposite. It is the steppes people who are open, curious, and innovative. And it is the civilization people who are close-minded, who are static, and who are unhappy, okay? So that's my argument to you today. All right, so let's go over some of my points before I show you the PPT, okay? All right, so let's discuss how civilization starts. So last class, we understand that there's a major river, and on top of this major river, you have a city develop, okay? Remember that we come together for religious purposes. We have settlements in order to celebrate nature, celebrate God, celebrate our religion, our belief system. And over time, what happens is that this system becomes unequal, it becomes hierarchical, and therefore we leave. But there are some places that are strategic for trade purposes, and therefore people don't want to leave because you can generate a lot of wealth and prosperity in these places. And so they become major cities. Okay, so the first city in world civilization is Uruk, okay? And over time, they become more and more prosperous, they build canals, they learn farming, they develop their own mythology. Okay? And then what happens is that as the population grows and grows, they go off and colonize other places along the trade route, okay? Maybe upstream and then downstream as well. And then what happens is that these city-states are now in competition with each other. And they have a system of competition called open cooperative competition, okay? This is a very important concept because this concept is what gives us innovation. So you have these three things in place: open, cooperation, competition. You'll be very innovative. Open just means that you want to learn, you want to grow, you want to learn from others. Cooperation means that you are in contact with others, so that you are learning the best practices from other people. Competition means that you want to be better than they are, okay? So in this system of city-states, you have massive innovation. And we see this throughout human history, okay? So think of China. When was China the most innovative? It was during the Chunqiu, right? The spring-autumn period. That's where we're getting Confucius from. Zhuanzi, okay? All the great ideas came from this period of the Chunqiu, okay? This is also true for Mesopotamia. This is also true for Egypt as well. Okay? And eventually what happens is that these city-states all merge into an empire because during this process of innovation, one city will be more innovative than the others, and therefore they will conquer the others. What's interesting often is that it is a city that is most disadvantaged that conquers the other cities because they're forced to be more innovative. So in China, the classic example is the Qing, right? The Qing was in the mountains. They had lower population. They were poorer. They were more isolated. And therefore, they had to be more innovative than the Zhao, the Chu, the Wei dynasties. Okay? And this is true also throughout human history. And so now you have an empire. And at first, this empire is extremely innovative. Why? For three reasons. Okay? The first thing is that it now has scale. Okay? It has size, therefore it's able to draw in more resources. Second is the idea of standardization. Standardization just means that now you're using the same monetary system, you're using the same laws, you're using the same communications network, okay? And it allows for better use of resources. And the last is the idea of centralization, meaning that you have one place controlling all activities elsewhere. And that allows you to build canals, that allows you to build temples, that allows you to undertake massive public works projects, okay? So in the beginning of the empire, there's massive consolidation of innovation, which leads to tremendous innovation, okay? But over time, what happens is the empire becomes the opposite of an open, cooperative competition system. Why? Well, first of all, it becomes insular, okay? Then it becomes secretive. And then it becomes a monopoly. That's what a bureaucracy is. Okay, do you guys understand? Okay, all right? So when an empire reaches a certain point of growth, it becomes a bureaucracy, and therefore it kills all innovation. So this idea that civilization leads to innovation is wrong, okay? Civilization leads ultimately to corruption. All right? Now, what's interesting is that even though this is a general rule of human development, it's not always true. There are exceptions, okay? So, for example, one civilization that we know that did not work out like this is something called the Indus Valley Civilization, which is modern-day Pakistan. And we'll discuss this later on. But they were actually, even though they had a city-state system, they were actually peaceful, egalitarian, and artistic, okay? They didn't go to war with each other. They didn't create a hierarchy. They didn't create a bureaucracy. And we'll discuss later on why this is the case. But this is something that you need to understand. Even though there are patterns to human history, there are always exceptions to the rule, okay? All right, so over time, the empire breaks down, okay? Why? Because you have a hierarchy in place, okay? A hierarchy, a bureaucracy. The people are at the bottom. And if you are a person in an empire, your life sucks, okay? It really sucks because you're essentially a slave. Why? Well, first of all, the empire goes to war a lot in order to protect its advantages, okay? So they can at any time just take you to war and you get killed, okay? Second is the problem of debt. It's very easy if you are a peasant to fall in debt. You owe rent to a landlord, then you have to sell your children, okay? So debt really sucks. And the last problem is immobility, which just means that you're just stuck where you are, okay? So the people in the empire, their lives suck, but they're stuck where they are because of war, debt, and immobility. And as we discussed last class, the bureaucracy will develop a mythology in order to justify why they are like this. Okay? But at the very top, it's actually even more problematic because what happens is at the top, you will eventually have a problem of elite overproduction. Okay? Elite overproduction just means that there are only a few limited spots for the elite, and the elite have too many children, and therefore they fight, okay? They break up into different factions, and each faction competes against each other for the right to be the elite. And because of this conflict at the very top, you usually have three results, okay? The first result is revolution, where one elite tells the people to overthrow everyone else, okay? So remember, what's really important to understand is the people do not create the revolution. The people themselves do not rebel. It's always one faction of the elite working with the people to overthrow the other factions, okay? That's what a revolution is. Second possibility is civil war, okay? Where the factions have different armies and they fight. And the third possibility is just they go to war with the empire, okay? But this is a common pattern in history. Now, what's really interesting is that as the empire falls, the pastoral people come and take over the empire, okay? The steppe people, or the pastoralists. Pastoralist just means that they don't farm for a living, they raise sheep, goats, and cows for a living, okay? They come and they take over the empire. Why is this the case? Because these people are the best fighters in the world. They have horses, they're archers, okay? So they're the best fighters in the world. So what often happens is one faction invites them to be mercenaries in the struggle, and eventually they recognize, you know what? We don't have to fight for the prince, we can take over ourselves. Another thing that happens is the faction that invites the mercenaries don't have enough money to pay them off. So the mercenaries are just like, screw this, we'll just take over the empire ourselves, okay? And what's important to understand is that throughout all this, the pastoralists are always in contact with the empire through three things, okay? Through trade, through pillaging. So the pastoralists come and steal from the people, and through being mercenaries. So this is a pattern throughout human history. So now the question we have to ask is, why are the pastoralists so different from people of civilization and empire? And the reason is geography. What I will show you is that people who are pastoralists grow up in a different environment than the people of civilization and empire, and therefore they have developed a different economy, as well as mythology, as well as culture, okay? All right, let's continue. But we're clear so far, right? Okay, so in the beginning, we had agriculture. Why did we have agriculture? Because as we discussed before, people came together for religious purposes. They built temples. And now you have to maintain the temples, therefore you build farms around the temple and you develop agriculture, okay? But because of climate change and overpopulation, people are always constantly forced to move to new places. So agriculture was first up in the Middle East, and then it went over to Europe, and it went over to other places as well, okay? So it spread around the world. So when they went to Europe, they could actually maintain their agricultural practices because the climate and the geography and the terrain of Europe was conducive to agriculture. And as a result, Europe maintained the cultural practices of the people of the Middle East, okay? And so they had egalitarian, artistic, and peaceful civilizations, okay? So why they were peaceful is that, first of all, women were in control. Okay, remember, it's the most natural thing to have women be part of the political class, okay? So women were in charge. So if there was any conflict, the women would just discuss it amongst themselves and come to a harmonious conclusion, okay? They wouldn't have to fight. Second thing is there was no money because there was no property, okay? The agriculture is something that you work on together and you share. There's no such concept as private property, okay? So in other words, no war, no conflict. So these are the three distinct characteristics of early human society. In an agricultural society, women are usually in command. There's no sense of private property. Everyone shares everything together, and there's no conflict and no war. People just discuss things and trade in order to reach a harmonious conclusion, okay? So what this changes is that the city grows and grows, and then you have a large city, and so you need a bureaucracy, okay? But in Europe, what's really important to understand about Europe is that unlike China and Egypt and Mesopotamia, it does not have a large river, and therefore you cannot grow a big city in Europe, okay? So that allows them to maintain a pretty good life, okay? So when they go to Europe, they're able to maintain the same cultural practices, but then they go to the steppes, okay? And the problem with steppes is you cannot grow food because it's all grassland, okay? You cannot farm. So now you have to change your cultural practice. So what was happening is that these people in the steppes, they started to trade with people with agriculture, okay? Also, you have people in the agriculture who moved to the steppes and they brought with them cows and sheep. And this changed everything. Because you as a person, you can't eat grass, but cows and sheep can. So now what you can do is you can base your entire economy around animals as opposed to agriculture, okay? But there's certain problems with cows and sheep, okay? The first problem is that they're expensive. So now you have a concept of private property, money. And this concept didn't really exist before, okay? And so if I see someone with a cow, I don't have a cow, what do? I want to go steal it, right? So this leads to conflict now, war and conflict. And because you have private property and war and conflict, you can't have a system run by women. You need a system run by men. This creates a patriarchy, okay? So this is a very important principle in human history. These three things go together, okay? Patriarchy, money, and war, okay? These three things always go together. Patriarchy, money, and war. Okay, so this is changing the economy of the steppes, and it's becoming different from agricultural societies, okay? And so now they need innovation in order to deal with the new economy, okay? So let's go over some of their major innovations. The first major innovation that's very important is the idea of lactose tolerance. You may not know this, but most humans cannot drink milk naturally, okay? So you need to develop the enzymes to drink milk naturally. And so they were able to do that because they were forced to rely on cows and sheep for their food. They had to learn how to drink milk. But when they learned how to drink milk, when they learned how to eat, when they started eating meat, guess what? They became stronger and taller, okay? So for most of human history, the people of the steppes were the tallest people in the world. They were the strongest in the world, okay? That's the first major innovation that changed their history. The second major innovation is horse riding. Why? Because the steppes are a huge area and it's flat. So you need to move around it a lot. Also remember, cows and sheep eat grass. So when they eat this in this pasture and they finish all the grass, they have to move somewhere else, okay? So the only way to protect your cows and sheep from other people is to be mobile. And so they learn how to domesticate horses, okay? Which is a major innovation and it took a long time. And you can imagine how hard that is to do because if horses see you, what do? They run away. So how do you train a horse to not run away and let the horse ride you? Well, it takes a lot of effort. But because they had to do it, they managed to do it, okay? And so with the horse riding, now you can have another invention, which is the wheel and the wagon. Wheel and wagon. Now you can put all your stuff in a wagon and move from camp to camp, okay? You can cover the entirety of the steppes, okay? Does that make sense, okay? And because of these three major innovations, you now have a different culture, okay? So let's go over what makes their culture distinctive from other places, okay? The first is the idea of patriarchy, where men are in control. And the reason why they're in control is because in the steppes, war is a constant thing, okay? So the culture becomes very masculine, very aggressive. It rewards aggression. It rewards courage, okay? The other thing is that when you have a patriarchy in place, you can have more children, okay? When women are in charge, women tend to practice birth control because they want to make sure that every child is healthy and every child lives to adulthood, okay? They want to avoid the risk of dying in childbirth. They want to avoid the risk of their child dying young, okay? But if men are in charge, they basically get women to have as many kids as possible, okay? Also remember, like, in this world, there's a lot of conflict, so you need as many boys to fight as possible, okay? But then you have a problem then. If you have a lot of children, you have a problem of inheritance. Like when you die, your cows go to who, right? Now let's assume you have 100 cows. You have like 10 boys. If you are fair and you give 10 cows to one boy, well, very quickly, your family is going to be poor. And because in the steppes, the weather is bad, your cows are very likely to die, well, then your entire family could be extinct in 2 or 3 generations. So they invented a new concept called primogeniture. Primogeniture just means that the eldest boy inherits everything. That ensures that the family can stay wealthy, okay? All right? But now your problem is, wait a minute, if the eldest boy inherits everything, what do the other boys do? Well, they have to go and steal other cows, okay? And to do that, they form secret societies, okay? Secret societies are just like, they're basically just gangs, okay? These gangs of young men who get together to do what? Well, they go steal cows and sheep. And what else do? They steal women, right? Because, right? I mean, like, what's the most valuable commodity in the steppes? Well, cows and women. So that's what you steal, okay? So this creates a culture of war and conflict constantly, right? And the third innovation is something called the patron-client relationship. And this is actually patronage. And this is what allows for the construction of society in the steppes. So remember, in a civilization, you have bureaucracy, you have centralization. But in the steppes, you can't have that because you can't have that many people. So you have a patron-client relationship. And all that means is that it's like a mafia, right? I'm the big brother, you're the little brother. So maybe I have 100 cows and you need cows. So I lend you 10 cows. But now you are loyal to me, okay? I'm the big brother, you're the little brother. And this creates the idea of tribes. Okay, does that make sense? What's really important here is that in civilization, bureaucracy maintains control over people over debt. And so you become a slave. But in the steppes, there's no concept of slavery. Okay? You're still a free and independent person, but you just you're just loyal to your big brother. So if your big brother needs you to do something, you go do it for him, okay? So there's still a level of freedom in the steppes that you don't have in civilization. And that's why they're such good fighters, okay? All right? So these three things are major innovations. But now that you have these innovations, you need a new mythology to justify or explain these innovations, okay? And so what they had was, they went from the mother goddess, okay? So mother goddess, again, is the religion of agricultural people, to the sky god. And the mother goddess wants you to be harmonious, okay? To be kind and compassionate. What does the sky god want you to do? The sky god wants you to conquer and exploit, okay? It wants you to destroy. It wants you to kill. It wants you to conquer, to steal. Okay? And also in this religion, horses and cows are very important. But as we discussed last class, here, grain and nature are very important. Okay? So you see how this works, right? Now, what's important to understand is that because this system does not allow for the creation of a bureaucracy, the steppes always practice open, cooperative competition. And it's a system that forces you to be aggressive. It forces you to be independent, okay? And it forces you to work hard. And that's why people of the steppes are the greatest warriors in human history. And that's why when the steppes people encounter the empire civilization, they usually are able to conquer the empire, okay? Does that make sense?